One weekend morning, the aroma of pancakes wafted from a two-story house in the Woodlands, a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Houston, Texas. "Mom, can I put lots of maple syrup on mine today?" asked 6-year-old Luke, his bright eyes sparkling as he sat at the kitchen counter. With his short black hair and refined features, he was the spitting image of his father, Michael. "Well, we were planning to go to the park after breakfast, weren't we? Don't you think it would be better to go easy on the syrup so you can play more?" Rebecca Morgan replied gently as she transferred fluffy pancakes from the pan to a plate. At 34, with her slender frame and long brown hair, she worked as a clinical research coordinator at a pharmaceutical company. Her meticulous and dedicated nature had earned her high praise throughout her 7-year career. "But Dad always lets me have lots." Luke's words made Rebecca pause for a moment. Her husband Michael, president of a construction company, had been traveling more frequently for work lately. This time, too, he had left suddenly the night before for a business trip. "I suppose," Rebecca said with a smile. Though her expression remained serene, there was a hint of loneliness in it. 7 years of marriage. Meeting Michael, who was working as a project manager for a hospital renovation, had felt like destiny. After dating for a year, they married, had Luke, and built a happy home together. Lately, though, something felt different. Michael's business trips had become more frequent, and family time had decreased. It wasn't unusual anymore for work matters to suddenly come up on holidays. "Oh my, look at the time." The kitchen clock showed 10 o'clock. It was Saturday. She had promised to take Luke to North Shore Park in the afternoon. It was also one of Patricia's regular visits. Her mother-in-law came by 2 or 3 times a month. Patricia, a former nurse, was meticulous and controlling by nature. While outwardly kind, Rebecca had felt somewhat suffocated by her since the beginning of their marriage. Patricia was known for doting excessively on Michael, and even after the wedding, she frequently voiced her opinions on trivial matters. "Luke, let's get you changed after you finish eating. We need to tidy your room before Grandma comes." "Okay. I want to show Grandma my new toy train." Rebecca felt her heart warm at her son's innocent smile. She believed she could overcome any anxiety as long as she could protect that smile. However, no one could have predicted that this peaceful daily life was about to be greatly shaken. Just past 2 p.m. at North Shore Park. Children's lively voices echoed as the strong Texas sun beat down on the playground equipment. Though the temperature exceeded 95 degrees Fahrenheit and heat rose from the asphalt, the weekend park was bustling with families. "Jake, let's go down the blue slide next." Luke was running around with his new friend, a boy from next door who was in the same kindergarten class. They had become close over the past 2 weeks. On weekends, neighborhood families gathered casually at the park. Families enjoying picnics on the grass, young couples pushing strollers, elderly couples walking their dogs. It was a peaceful weekend scene. The morning's events were still nagging at Rebecca's mind. "Mother, you're unusually early today," she had said when offering coffee in the living room, but Patricia had declined, seeming unsettled. "I'm not feeling well, and I have some matters to attend to." Her usually meticulous mother-in-law had kept checking her mobile phone repeatedly, showing signs of restlessness. It was unprecedented for her to leave after just 30 minutes. Sitting on a bench, Rebecca occasionally checked work emails on her smartphone while reflecting on the morning's events. Michael had left the house last night, announcing a sudden business trip. He had been really busy lately, with family time becoming increasingly scarce. "I wish Dad would come to the park with us sometimes," Rebecca murmured as she watched Luke playing with Jake's father. As Michael's absent weekends increased, she noticed her son's lonely expressions more often. Just then, Rebecca's smartphone rang. It was from an unknown number. "Hello, this is Rebecca Morgan." "Rachel? Why aren't you at the hospital?" "Luke is dying." The voice on the other end was unmistakably Patricia's, but it was distraught and almost screaming, completely different from her usual composed manner. She could hear what sounded like ambulance sirens in the background. "What?" "Luke is right here in front of me." Rebecca instinctively looked toward the slide. Luke was playing energetically with his friend, his figure vibrant in the warm sunlight as he slid down the bright blue slide with shouts of joy. "What are you talking?" Patricia's voice cut off, and suddenly the call ended. The sound from the receiver abruptly ceased, as if it had been a lie. "Mother." "Hello." Rebecca hurriedly tried to call back, but couldn't get through. Anxiety welled up inside her. Had her mother-in-law confused her with someone else? Who was Rachel? And why the word "dying"? Patricia's words echoed in her mind. Just to be sure, she called Memorial Hermann the Woodlands Medical Center, but due to privacy protection, they couldn't provide detailed information over the phone. "I'm sorry, but patient information can only be provided in person." Rebecca felt frustrated by the bureaucratic response. Meanwhile, there was still no contact from her mother-in-law. Instead, she received a call from the hospital. "Mrs. Morgan. I apologize, but we received an urgent call from your mother earlier." "Yes, that's right. What's happening?" The nurse on the phone paused, as if choosing her words carefully. That silence only heightened Rebecca's anxiety. "We currently have a serious situation. Could you please come to the hospital as soon as possible?" Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. She detected unmistakable tension in the nurse's tone. Various possibilities ran through her mind. Had something happened to Michael? Or Luke? Time to go. As she hurried toward the playground equipment, Rebecca's mind was in turmoil. Her son playing energetically before her eyes. Her mother-in-law's distressed voice on the phone. The unusual behavior this morning. And the mysterious call from the hospital. What did it all mean? Instinctively, she realized something serious had occurred. Something that might drastically shake their everyday life. "Mom, I want to play a little more," Luke said pleadingly, his sweaty cheeks glowing. "I'm sorry, honey. We need to go somewhere important right now." Holding Luke close, Rebecca steeled herself. She had to go to the hospital. Whatever truth awaited her there, no matter how cruel it might be. Starting the Range Rover's engine, Rebecca let out a deep sigh. In the rearview mirror, she could see Luke sitting in his child's seat, his small lips pursed in a slightly disgruntled expression. She had a heavy premonition that their lives might change dramatically at their destination. As she put the car in motion, she found herself unconsciously checking her son's reflection in the rearview mirror again and again. At Memorial Hermann, the Woodlands Medical Center's emergency department, Rebecca walked down the white corridor permeated with the smell of disinfectant, holding her son's hand. The fluorescent lights cast a cold, clinical glow, like a harbinger of what was to come. Passing through the automatic doors, they encountered unexpected chaos for a Saturday afternoon. Dozens of people sat in the waiting room, some quietly crying with bowed heads. Nurses hurried back and forth, and occasionally, figures in white coats who appeared to be doctors called out patients' names. When she gave her name at reception, the nurse momentarily displayed an odd expression. "Mrs. Morgan, yes." Something about the inflection bothered her, but before she could think about it, Luke tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, I'm thirsty." There was a water fountain in the corner of the waiting room. As they headed toward it, she spotted Patricia. Her mother-in-law was sitting in a corner of the waiting room, looking terribly distraught. Her usually perfectly groomed hair was disheveled, and her makeup was smudged. Beside her sat two unfamiliar women. The younger one appeared to be in her early 30s, while the older woman looked old enough to be her mother. Both were in tears. The younger woman had a similar build to Rebecca's. With shoulder-length brown hair, she even bore some resemblance to Rebecca herself. This made the situation feel even more uncanny. "Patricia." The moment Rebecca called out, all three women turned simultaneously. Patricia reacted first. The color drained from her face, as if her worst fear had become reality. "Rebecca." Her voice trembled as if she'd seen a ghost. At that moment, the young woman let out a cry. "Who is she?" Her eyes were fixed on Luke, who was holding Rebecca's hand. Her expression showed intense agitation and confusion. And in her eyes, there was something, recognition, fear, or a kind of understanding. "It can't be." The woman who appeared to be the young woman's mother glared at Patricia with eyes full of anger. Her hands were shaking, and her face had turned red with rage. Rebecca felt her heart stop for a moment. All the pieces began rapidly falling into place. Michael's increased business trips, sudden schedule changes, his inseparability from his phone, and her mother-in-law's recent strange behavior. You're Rebecca." The young woman stood up. Her hands were trembling. Though dressed in a sophisticated black dress, her posture seemed about to crumble. "I'm Rachel. Michael's fiancée." Those words froze the air in the waiting room. The surrounding conversations seemed to stop for a moment. It felt as if time had stood still. "Fiancé. I'm his wife." Rebecca's voice was surprisingly calm, even to herself. Though her mind had gone blank, her body remained strangely composed. It was as if she had stepped outside herself and was viewing the situation objectively. "No." Rachel, as she had introduced herself, stumbled back into her chair, collapsing like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Her mother, supporting her daughter, shouted. Her voice carried anger unlike anything Rebecca had ever experienced before. "What is the meaning of this? Patricia. Explain yourself. Has your son been living a double life? And you knew about it?" Rachel's mother's voice mixed anger and sorrow. Her eyes burned like flames. I. Patricia stumbled over her words. She looked so weak, unimaginably different from her usual dignified self. Deep wrinkles showed through her makeup, making her appear older than her years. "Mom, that child." Rachel pointed a trembling finger at Luke. Her finger wavered as if trying to confirm reality. "He looks just like my son." Those words made Rebecca's world shake violently. She felt reality crumbling beneath her feet. "Your son?" "Yes. He's in intensive care right now. A traffic accident, this morning, on our way back from shopping, at a crosswalk." Rachel's voice broke off. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving black mascara trails. And then, all the truth began to unfold. Through trembling voices, broken words, and tears. Michael Morgan's perfect double life. 2 families. And 2 sons of the same age. Everything had been meticulously planned and executed lies. 3 years ago. Patricia began speaking in a thin voice that sounded hollow, as if coming from far away. Michael began a relationship with Rachel, who was a construction site clerk. Then, she had his child too. The 2 children were born just 1 month apart. "How long have you known?" At Rebecca's question, Patricia lowered her eyes. She looked like a criminal admitting guilt. "A year ago. I accidentally discovered their relationship. I just wanted to protect the family's reputation." "So you kept quiet." Rachel's mother's voice cut sharply through the air, slicing through the hospital's busy atmosphere. "Even though my daughter and grandson's lives were in danger, you just covered up your son's infidelity. Yesterday's settlement negotiations were all your independent decision too, weren't they?" Luke anxiously tugged at Rebecca's sleeve. The gesture brought her mind back to reality. Her young son's warm hand felt like the only certain reality in this nightmare-like situation. What should she do now? Before her stood another woman who had been deceived and hurt. And her mother-in-law, who had known everything but remained silent. And another innocent child who had been in an accident. Rebecca took a deep breath. While desperately searching for answers about how to face the coming storm, her heart was quietly but surely moving toward a decision. In the hospital conference room. An hour had passed since Rachel's son's surgery began. Right after everyone had breathed a sigh of relief at the doctor's initial report that his life wasn't in danger, it happened. "Let me tell you everything," Rachel's mother began in a quiet but strong voice. Along with deep sadness, her eyes held a burning determination. 3 years ago, Michael appeared at the construction site where my daughter worked. At the time, he visited the site almost daily as the person in charge of major renovation work. Rachel kept her face down, trembling slightly. At first, it was just an ordinary meeting between a man and woman. But Michael kept his marriage secret until the end. Rather, he said he wanted to get married soon. Rachel's mother's voice caught. After a deep sigh, she continued. "And when we found out Rachel was pregnant, he promised to marry me right away." Rachel suddenly looked up. There were no more tears in her eyes. Michael said he was in the middle of divorce proceedings in his hometown of Boston. That he loved me. that he wanted to start a new life with a new family. Rebecca listened quietly. Her expression was unreadable. Only her fist, clenched under the table, trembled slightly. But it was all lies. Rachel's mother began speaking again. Yesterday, we accidentally discovered an incredible truth. During settlement negotiations with Patricia. At those words, Patricia shrank back. That Michael had other mistresses. Patricia became upset and started talking. But at the time, we didn't know who she was talking about. I just wanted to protect my son. Patricia's voice trembled. But I was foolish to think settlement money would solve everything. Solve. Rebecca's voice rang sharply. You thought you could solve other people's lives with money. At that moment, the conference room door opened. Rebecca. Michael stood there. He looked exhausted, unimaginably different from his usual dashing appearance. Let me explain. Explain. Rebecca quietly stood up. Our 7 years of marriage. Luke's existence. And 3 years with another family. What explanation could change this reality? Michael stood speechless. It was meant to be temporary. This time Rachel stood up. Temporary. You promised to marry me, even had a child. Was that temporary too? The atmosphere in the conference room grew tense. I'm also responsible, Patricia said in a thin voice. When I discovered Michael's double life a year ago, I should have stopped it immediately. But you chose to protect your son. Rachel's mother's voice no longer held anger. Only deep disappointment seeped through. And as a result, my grandson had an accident. Those words weighed heavily on everyone's hearts. Rebecca looked out the window. The evening sky was beginning to turn orange. In the hospital parking lot, people bustled about. An ordinary day for some could be life-changing for others. Let me say this, Rebecca slowly turned toward Michael. Let's get divorced. The words came out surprisingly easily. Rebecca, wait. Give me a chance to make things right. Rebecca smiled sadly. There's nothing to make right in a relationship where trust has been lost. 8 months later, in a quiet apartment in suburban Houston. Luke, have you finished your homework? Rebecca called out while preparing dinner in the kitchen. Almost done, came an energetic reply from the living room. The divorce was finalized faster than expected. Rebecca got custody, and they reached a reasonable agreement on child support and settlement money. Her relationship with Rachel had become surprisingly smooth. The two sons now sometimes play together on weekends. The new life isn't easy. But Rebecca kept moving forward. While she couldn't erase the past of betrayal and hurt, she knew the experience had made her stronger. Outside the window, the Texas sunset was turning red. Tomorrow would bring another new day. Standing in the kitchen, Rebecca smiled quietly.